Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 5:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Dr. Marty Makary will explain to us why 97% of Americans have said no thanks to another COVID booster shot. 97%. The hysteria may be over. Dr. Makary will explain why. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The White House had its annual Halloween party last night. You remember the Halloween party from when Trump was president? They'd stand out on the South Lawn, and the kids would walk by. I remember there's a famous video of Donald Trump and Melania Trump handing out candy, and a little kid dressed as an inflatable minion from the movie Minions, or Despicable Me, walks by. And the Minion character is a big yellow, it almost looks like a big marshmallow. Arm sticking out, but the top of his head flat, like a marshmallow. He's like a cylinder, practically. And so he comes waddling by, this little kid in this inflatable costume. And Trump, were they handing out full-size candy bars in the Trump White House? I think they were. He handed out, I think it was like a full-size Hershey bar. And those are, by the way, the best house in the neighborhood. The house that hands out the full-size candy bars, none of this fun size or mini candy. No, full-size bars, they're the best house in the neighborhood. They are. And Trump puts a candy bar, not in the kid's hands, but just right on the kid's flat head, the costume's flat head, and the kid starts walking away. It's really great. It reminds me of that Trump moment when Trump is shouting out to the kid who's trying to mow the White House lawn. Remember, he invited, this kid was like, I want to mow the lawn at the White House. And Trump was like, sure. So the kid shows up with his dad, and they bring a little push mower, and he's mowing the South Lawn, and Trump's yelling to him. It's been the source of many memes. It's a very, very funny image. Those were better days, weren't they? Now we've got Biden. Biden in the Halloween event is something else. Biden last night was trying to hand out candy to the children. There's a video of Biden, and no sound worth hearing for it. I'll just describe the video. Biden tries to palm two M&M boxes in his hand. They've got these White House commemorative M&M boxes with the presidential seal on them. It's a cool keepsake from the White House. Trump had them too. If you go visit the White House, maybe get some White House candy and bring it back with you and hold on to it. Never eat it because you want to keep the box. You're like, oh, look at this cool thing. And so Biden tries to palm two boxes at once to hand the kid some candy, and he ends up dropping all of the candy on the ground. It's like, oh no. And then the kid's waiting for him, and Biden has to stumble down to pick it up, and it becomes a big crisis. You're like watching, you're holding your breath. You're like, please let the guy stand up. Please let him survive this maneuver where he's bending over to pick up candy, ever so gingerly picking it up off the ground at the age of 80 years old. So that happened. And then I see today, I didn't realize this until the New York Post reported it. Secretary of State Antony Blinken walked his 4-year-old son through the line. The kid's 4 years old, dressed as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, there's not much to this outfit. It's just a green sweatshirt and green sweatpants and a little Ukrainian flag pin on his shirt, walking up to Biden to get his candy. It's like, what? That's the Halloween costume for your 4-year-old? You know, at the age of 4, when kids, they're speaking by this point, in case it's been a while, and they're walking. They've got minds. They've got things that they're interested in for Halloween. You're like, what do you want to be for Halloween? Who says Volodymyr Zelensky? Which 4-year-old says that? What are the dinner table conversations like in the Blinken household? Also, 4-year-olds, they've got all sorts of things that typically go along with their favorite characters, right? There are the books and the posters and the movies and the shows and the swag and the theme parks and take your pick. Vladimir Zelensky? You're the Secretary of State for the United States of America. Your kid couldn't be guided towards an American hero of some kind if you were interested in doing that? Zelensky. Now, of course, I am operating under the assumption that it was Tony Blinken who forced this on his 4-year-old. You're going to dress as Zelensky. This is going to be great. I'm going to use this for my career. Vladimir's really going to like me after this. Maybe that's what I'm thinking happened. But maybe the kid's like a lot smarter than I give him credit for. Maybe the kid realized, like, hey, this will unlock every door you could possibly imagine. If I dress up as Zelensky, There's no chance I'm getting beat in the candy hall. I'm going to get so much candy as Vladimir Zelensky. It's going to be unbelievable. So maybe this 4-year-old's thinking it through, you know? I'm leaving open that possibility that he realizes he's going to clean up if he dresses as Zelensky. And he'd be right, you know? Judging by history, that's been the case. You know, we have given well over $100 billion to Ukraine, as you know now. 113, I think, was the last count. And Biden and McConnell are already cooking up another 60 or so billion dollars of more money to dump into Ukraine. But as they contemplate whether that's a good idea, one, all these Democrats are trying to force it to be a part of an Israel aid package. In fact, Chuck Schumer was giving a speech today where he said that there is no way we're passing a standalone Israel aid bill. Like, how dare you, House of Representatives, attempt to do that? Republicans in the House say they'd like to take these things in isolation. Let's do them one at a time, which is obviously how you demonstrate respect for the American people, by taking up bills with one issue at a time and not trying to smuggle in your other priorities, right? So one at a time. And Chuck Schumer's been freaking out about all of this. It's a poison pill to consider funding Ukraine by itself, or to consider funding Israel by itself. Why is it a poison pill? Meaning, if a poison pill is what you typically do when you add something to a bill to ensure that it doesn't pass. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is a standalone funding bill. The House of Representatives say we're going to send some cash towards Israel. They want to do it by drawing from money that's already been allocated. They say, well, we promised we'd get rid of these IRS agents. What was the number again? Like 80,000? Like some ridiculous number of IRS agents. We're going to get rid of them because they're not actually going to be targeting rich people like Biden said. They're going to be targeting normal Americans, middle-class people. In fact, the Biden administration, this was a little noticed headline recently, they admitted as much, that they can't actually only target people that make over $400,000. In fact, the IRS doesn't really know who those people are until they audit you. they can't. We're only going to target the people who make over $400,000. Okay, how are you going to pick? Well, we got to audit everybody first, and then we'll know who made over $400,000. Oh, so you are going to target middle-class people? Yeah, no, that is going to happen. So the Republicans said, what we're going to do is we'll strip that money from the IRS and we'll send it to Israel. We'll help Israel, our allies in Israel, out. Two birds, one stone. Take care of that IRS problem. And you don't have to allocate any other money. You already have money out there. And that's a perfectly good idea. So that's why Senate Democrats are opposed to it. They don't want to do that. They're like, no way. No way. We want to hassle the middle class and jam through funding that's unrelated to Israel in the same package. Can we do that, please? That's their priority. Now, on the Ukraine funding side, there's a big Time magazine piece this week that involves people who are close to Vladimir Zelensky. We told you a little bit about this yesterday, saying that, yeah, the corruption is crazy. All the headlines we see in the United States, oh, Zelensky's tackling corruption. He's firing people. He's getting rid of the people who are corrupt. They're saying it's not even possible. There is so much corruption throughout the Ukrainian government. You have a top aide to Vladimir Zelensky telling Time magazine, quote, people are stealing like there's no tomorrow. They are pocketing state funds, which should be read as American money, because we are paying for the whole damn government in Ukraine. We're paying the pensions of everybody there. In fact, this top aide asked the reporter, hey, would you please turn off your audio recorder so he could speak more freely? Ohio Senator J.D. Vance saying this week, as a result of that reporting, he said, quote, I've sat in a lot of briefings where I was promised Ukraine doesn't have a corruption problem. The Biden administration has lied to us. Not one more penny to Ukraine, says J.D. Vance. Well, that's reasonable. If you are constantly being lied to by both the United States government and by extension the corrupt Ukrainian government, then why would you want to continue to be a glutton for punishment? Like, you know, you're straight up being abused in this process. And so J.D. Vance is offering a blanket statement on this subject, saying no more money at all. Other Republicans are saying, yeah, look, No more until you explain yourselves. Republicans on the House Budget Committee, according to Fox News is reporting today, are demanding a full accounting of all funds that have been sent by the United States to Ukraine amid its war with Russia. Chairman Jody Arrington of Texas and Budget Committee Oversight Task Force Chairman Jack Bergman of Michigan directed a letter to the Office of Management and Budget's Director Shalonda Young, demanding transparency, obviously, regarding the strategy behind sending billions of dollars overseas. Why is it that lawmakers, members of Congress, have no idea how this money is being spent? I'm not talking about average Americans. I'm not talking about the regular Joes who are paying close attention to this, like so many of you are. I'm talking about members of Congress on the what are these committees that they're on? The House Budget Committee, the place that spends the money. They don't know how the money's being spent. Quote, it's now been over 20 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. Congress has provided $114 billion in supplemental appropriations, not including potentially billions in additional repurposed, transferred, and reprogrammed funds. And yet we are no closer to getting a clear picture of the Biden administration's strategy for providing U.S. assistance in Ukraine, the letter says. And it asserts that Congress remains in the dark on how funds are being spent. Well, that's not acceptable then. That can't happen. You can't have the branch of government that's responsible for cutting these checks. If they have no idea how the money's being spent, our system is completely broken. And of course, our system is completely broken. So you can't do that anymore. At all. And this money, it just keeps flowing all over the place to all of these like corrupt places. And it's a black box. Here's another example of this. Separately, the Biden administration is planning on sending a ton of cash into Gaza. And that's all well and good. There are people in Gaza who could desperately use the help. But the bad part of all of this is every time aid packages go into Gaza, Hamas steals it. Hamas steals it and uses it for their war machine, for their terrorist war machine. And so today in Congress, this question came up. How can you guarantee that this aid is going to be used the right way? In the Senate, Antony Blinken is asked by Senator Bill Hagerty about this. How can you guarantee that this aid is actually going to go to civilians and not to Hamas? Listen to this.
In May of 2021, I traveled to Israel after the 11-day war. I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu with his national security advisor. They briefed me and my team on the fact that every humanitarian aid dollar, every foreign aid dollar that goes into Gaza is controlled by Hamas. They either direct it, they tax it, or they divert it. They even take pipes intended for the water system for civilians and turn those into rockets that are aimed at Israel. We've seen Hamas's own videos demonstrating this. So I'm going to come back and ask you, can you guarantee that U.S. taxpayer dollars weren't used in October 7th attack?
What I can guarantee is that we take every possible precaution to ensure that these resources are not diverted.
We really try. We really try. We try not to let but they're constantly diverted. Constantly. All the fuel is being stolen by Hamas for its war machine. People don't get clean water because of that decision, because of that theft. Hamas steals all the cement, the concrete, everything that's needed for infrastructure they use for their war machine. And that's been true for a long time, not just since the October 7th attack on Israel. And our government includes the idiots who are going to keep dumping cash in here. Now, I have a lot for you here. We interviewed Luke Rosiak of the Daily Wire recently about a woman who works for the Department of Homeland Security by the name of Nejwa Ali. She is an enthusiastic supporter of Hamas terrorism, so much so that she told Luke Rosiak recently that she was celebrating the hang glider attacks in Israel. This is the phone call they had when he was doing the reporting.
Why'd you celebrate the hang gliders?
I will absolutely celebrate them.
I will abso-bleeping-lutely celebrate them, bleep hole, she says to Luke Rosiak. And he said, thank you for your on-the-record comment. And he wrote it down and he shared it with the public. Meanwhile, we don't actually know her status, right? Is she still working for the federal government? The answer to that question coming up. I've got audio for you. It's wild.
Why'd you celebrate the hang gliders?
I will absolutely celebrate them.
Oh, yeah. Nuja Ali, a DHS employee, her job is to vet asylum claims and say who should be allowed in the country and who shouldn't. The exact wrong person to make that assessment, big terrorism supporter. Alejandro Mayorkas was asked about this by Senator Josh Hawley today.
She also posted this graphic. Now, this is a fake graphic, I want to be clear, but I think we understand it. This is a paraglider, a Hamas paraglider, depicted here with a machine gun flying into Israel. She posted it under her online alias with the celebratory Free Palestine. Mr. Secretary, what's going on here? Is this typical of people who work at DHS? This is an asylum and immigration officer who is posting these, frankly, pro-genocidal slogans and images on the day that Israelis are being slaughtered in their beds. What have you done about this?
4 things I'd like to say to you.
Oh, come on.
Number 1.
4. He's got a list.
Your question to suggest that that is emblematic of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security is despicable.
I'm sorry. What have you done? This person works for the Department of Homeland Security. Have you fired her?
That was 1 of 4 answers.
Have you fired her?
1.
Have you fired her? Don't come to this hearing room when Israel has been invaded and Jewish students are barricaded in libraries in this country and cannot be escorted out because they are threatened for their lives. You have employees who are celebrating genocide, and you are saying it's despicable for me to ask the question? Has she been fired?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary.
After the consumption of Senator Hawley's time, I'd like to speak.
Has she been fired?
Because I will
We
not
would like
be,
an answer. Would you?
because I will not be given the
What a sack of crap this guy is. I'm sorry. Isn't this the most annoying and tedious exchange ever? This is the clearest thing you could possibly do. It's just say, yeah, she is awful. We are doing everything we can to fire her. It turns out it's kind of tricky to get rid of federal government employees, but we will make sure that she packs up her stuff and gets the hell out of Dodge.
Has she been fired?
So that individual has been placed on administrative leave.
So she's not been fired.
Number 2.
Why has she not been fired?
Number 2, the individual was hired in 2019.
Why has she not been fired?
Number 3, I cannot speak to an ongoing personnel matter.
Why has this person not been fired? Your answer is you can't speak to it? This isn't sufficient to fire her?
I am not in a position to speak to an ongoing personnel matter.
He can't even give a negative judgment to what she said and did? What a jerk this dude is. I mean, there is no reason he should be anywhere near the levers of power. And of course, Biden decided to give him that. It's really remarkable. It's 5:30 right now. Coming up, Dr. Marty Makary will talk about how nobody trusts the government anymore, especially on those COVID shots. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 5:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A lot to get to with you. Let me start with some good news for you. It seems like Americans are waking up and big time, and have decided that they don't want to play the COVID game anymore. I know for you probably and for your family that ended a long time ago. But did you know that last year among American adults, all Americans actually, that just 17% of the country went and got their latest COVID booster? Just 17%. The media really do not emphasize this enough. It was just 7. So by that point, like, trust in our government and the pharmaceutical companies has so fallen off the cliff that only 17% of Americans were like, yeah, I'll do that. And they went and got the jab. Right now, only 3% of Americans have even done it this year. 3. Nobody is getting these things. What happened? It's kind of fascinating. I want to get into the details here with a guy who follows it for a living. Dr. Marty Makary joins us on the phone. He's a professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Makary, great to talk to you again, sir.
Good to be with you, Vince.
Only 3% of Americans so far, a little bit more than that, have decided it's even worth their time and their health to get the jab this year. What does that tell you?
Well, I think Americans have basically said we don't want a vaccine that's approved based on data from 12 mice. when they had 6 months to do a randomized controlled trial, and Pfizer probably had enough money to pay for a randomized trial. They made $100 million.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was laughing as you said that. I missed the actual figure. How much money did they make off of us?
They made $100 billion during the pandemic, so I think they could afford to run a randomized trial.
It's like Ukraine money. $100 billion. So they made $100 billion, and they only tested the latest jab on 12 mice. Did you say that?
Yeah, 12 mice. So that would be $8 billion per mouse if they spend all that money on the experiment on 12 mice. But presumably it's much less expensive. They could have run a trial. Trial cost maybe $20 to $60 million. So
yes,
peanuts. But they had greased the system with the White House. The amount of cell phone calls between the Pfizer executives and the White House and the back and forth. They basically they decided before there was any shred of data that they were just going to approve this thing, whatever Pfizer put out. And so they did, and America said no thank you. 97% of Americans have not gotten this new thing after months of the CDC director meeting with black church leaders and putting out social media posts and talking about this thing incessantly. Is this really where we want to put all of our energy in public health right now? Is this where we want our CDC focused?
So it strikes me, Dr. Makary, as you're explaining this, that's like an inherently unsafe thing for the government to do. The whole reason we have these health agencies, presumably, is to safeguard us against bad actors in the private sector. So you're supposed to vet these drugs before they go to market. And you said they only tested it on 12 mice? I can't even imagine that being a safe way to assess a drug.
Yeah, that was the Pfizer vaccine that they just approved a couple months ago. It was based on data from 12 mice. The Moderna vaccine that was approved at the same time, that was tested in 50 human beings, but they only followed them for about 2 weeks, and no one dropped dead out of the 50, but one had what they called a medically attended adverse event in the report. They won't tell us what it was. Moderna will not tell us what happened to that person, but 1 in 50 people who got it in those 2 weeks they followed them had this adverse event. So I think the American people are just saying no, thank you. I don't know doctors who have gotten the new COVID vaccine. I mean, I'm sure there's some.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask you because you deal in public health. How captured are our agencies by these big pharmaceutical companies? I'm reminded of the opioid crisis and the extent to which the FDA bent over backwards to protect Purdue Pharma from any meaningful scrutiny, and they just went ahead and pushed OxyContin into public and caused a massive wave of addiction, pain, and death but through that action. How captured are these agencies, sir?
Well, I can't tell the difference sometimes between pharma and our health agencies when they put out statements and recommend things. You know, I couldn't go to the American Public Health Association conference as a professor because I didn't receive the booster. So, I mean, how much free speech are we going to have on the merits of the booster mandate?
Yeah, what kind of debate would that be? So what kind of debate would that be at that conference? It's like there's no chance that a conflicting opinion would enter the room because you were already forced to adopt one.
Well, it would be a debate between a vaccine extremist and a vaccine radical extremist, talking back and forth between the two in a fireside chat at the podium. Same with the National Academy of Medicine. I couldn't even attend as an elected member because I didn't have the booster. So, yeah, I mean, there's a bit of, groupthink, but I'll tell you this. You were talking about the opioid mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, medical establishment made that mistake for 30 years. They made that mistake. They put out the false dogma that opioids were not addictive. They hurt a lot of people. Almost 1 million people died because of that mistake. Now, when they wing it, when they just say, hey, we're not going to do the proper scientific study to evaluate whether or not opioids are addictive, we're just going to pull it out of our butt. It's just going to be an opinion, and we're just going to put it out there. We don't have a good track record in medicine. We got that wrong for 30 years. We got saturated fat causing heart attacks wrong for 50 years. We got kids should avoid peanuts wrong for 15 years until we realized, no, kids should be around peanuts. It's part of immune tolerance. And we said the blood bank was totally safe during the AIDS outbreak for 7 years when all sorts of people were getting it from a blood transfusion. So when we don't use data and they just wing it, we don't have a great track record. That's why we've got to stick to good medical science.
When you say it like that, it's like, man, how could any of us have fallen for the government's dictates out the gate on this one? Did you become, just as a general question, Dr. Makary, did you become more cynical about public health during this whole saga with COVID?
Well, I've been writing about the groupthink of the medical establishment for a long time. You know, what happens in medicine is they all get together and sort of the old belts and suspenders professors at the NIH decide what is research and not research, and we get these big blind spots. So we don't have any good research on food as medicine or on cooking classes to treat those with diabetes. Instead, we're just throwing insulin at people.
Yes.
We're just starting to understand sleep science and how important it is with so many chronic illnesses and longevity. So these are the things you were not allowed to talk about, and these are the things I wrote about in my books.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And then it always strikes me, like, you know, think about early COVID, since this is the big example that we all lived through. That one of the obvious things to do to mitigate the damage of actually catching the bug was go for a walk, lose some weight, moderate your diet, you know, do some lifestyle changes. But instead, we've developed a culture in the United States, pushed along by these federal agencies and by the big pharmaceutical companies, that every problem has a medical solution, that we have to have a drug. There's a drug somewhere that can solve this affliction, rather than any of the number of obvious things that we can do immediately.
Well, look at the analysis of all the money we poured into schools to get high-quality HEPA filters. Ultimately, in the end, it was found to be no different from cracking the window. And we looked for a pharmaceutical solution to every problem in society. Look at the Ozempic craze. Look at all the drugs they want to put kids on now for anxiety and depression. How about creating communities and addressing loneliness? And, you know, rebuilding relationships and addressing fatherhood. These are issues that are at the root of health, but these are things the old guard establishment doesn't like to talk about because it's not a pharma solution. Even during COVID, you could give someone vitamin D and it would help, but no pharma executive gets rich off of vitamin D like they do a newly patented pharma product. Yeah,
you can't. You know, you don't profit as much from telling people to use some portion control, go for a walk, raise your children, right? That's not, you know, not as much money in that as the federal government forcing drugs into our arms. Hey, Dr. Marty Makary, I really appreciate your time as always. And man, what a revelation. Just 3% of the country is still playing the game. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Vince. Thanks.
It's Dr. Marty Makary, a man who has been open about everything he knows and everything he doesn't throughout this whole saga. I really, again, through all these years throughout COVID, one of the guys I really enjoyed talking to was always Dr. Marty Makary. I still do. I'm grateful for all of the time he has spent with us here. I want to shift gears here for a moment and talk about another bit of craziness that's going on close to home. Washington, D.C. is the scene of nonstop crime. And this week we have a number of new headlines on the subject. There are countless headlines on this that come past us every day. But one of them is NBC Washington headline overnight. Bowser, as in the mayor, not the cartoon character from Mario, Bowser slams D.C. judge for sending 15-year-old carjacking suspect home. 15-year-old carjacking suspect home. Visibly frustrated, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser lashed out Monday at a Superior Court judge who sent a 15-year-old carjacking suspect home instead of sending her to a secure facility pending trial on robbery charges. According to court testimony, days after being sent home, that girl and her half-sister were a part of a group that allegedly called and then carjacked a rideshare driver last Thursday. Her half-sister died in a crash Thursday in D.C.'s Brentwood neighborhood shortly after the alleged carjacking. So Mayor Bowser is ticked off about this, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. She's upset. Here she is. This is NBC's Forbes report. Upset at this judge for letting routine carjackers go free.
This afternoon, an angry D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser lashed out at a judge who allowed a repeat suspect to go home instead of being sent to juvenile detention. The I-Team and reporter Ted Oberg first looked into this case on Friday. He's back now with us with new information. Ted?
Jim and Owen, this is a tragic back and forth over a deadly carjacking incident and the teen suspects allegedly involved. Our work shows the city may not have the room to keep up with this year's pace of juvenile crime in the district. Thursday morning, a teen girl died in this crash in D.C.'s Brentwood neighborhood. According to court testimony, 90 minutes earlier, she and her stepsister were allegedly part of a group who called and then carjacked an Uber driver.
Insane.
A city source confirms both the alleged suspect now in custody.
How free? If you are, maybe you're an Uber driver. I know we have Uber drivers in our audience, and we'll have to get to this in a later show, I think, just because given the time constraints here. But how freaked out are you by some of these calls you get now? Like, hey, you know, come pick up so and so at this corner. It doesn't really matter what corner of the city it is. It has to be somewhere in your head that somebody's about to carjack you.
Her stepsister, who died in the accident, were previously charged. A judge ordered the suspect sent to a shelter home, a type of secure detention, but not juvenile jail. When space couldn't be found in a secure home after 2 weeks, the judge said she sent the girls home to their parents with a GPS monitor. According to court testimony, 6 days later, the monitor's battery was dead while the young suspect was allegedly committing an armed carjacking. Today, Mayor Bowser expressed her frustration that a judge would allow both young women charged with violent crimes to go back to the community instead of being held in stepped-up secure detention.
And in my opinion, you've been arrested for the 7th time for carjacking. That is where you belong. The judge, however, DYRS does not make that decision. Judges do. And it's the judge's right to say, I prefer shelter, and if I can't get a shelter, then I'm going to send this child home. The child was sent home. The child is now not with us.
You know, every so often, Muriel Bowser definitely speaks out against, she has, I will, to give her credit for that, she speaks out against a lot of the soft on crime people that are around her, all part of her party, who have been causing so much trouble in D.C. and releasing so many criminals back into the streets. But at the same time, the city government is right now, as we speak, refreshing the paint job on Black Lives Matter Plaza in front of the White House. Muriel Bowser took pictures in front of it. She was encouraging the very criminality that she's now scolding everybody else for. And so she's right. There's no excuse for a 7-time carjacker to be like, oh, back out on the street again. And now there's a dead girl, a dead teenager, and just one of many. Earlier this week, there was a teenager who was shot and killed after a pair of teens attempting to carjack an off-duty federal officer in Washington, D.C. Doesn't usually go well. It didn't go well there. 2 teens attempted to carjack the off-duty federal officer. The officer shot and killed one of them. The other teen took off running. The officer is cooperating as D.C. police conduct their investigation. But now it's gotten to the point that D.C. police is sharing tips. WUSA 9 has this. Tips on how to not be carjacked in the city. This is what we've been led to. And the tips include this. When you are on the road, always keep your doors locked and your windows rolled up. If it's hot and you don't have air conditioning, roll them up at least part way, no matter how short the distance you're traveling or how safe the neighborhood. Drive in the center lane to make it harder for potential carjackers to approach the car. Avoid driving alone. Travel with someone whenever possible, especially at night. Oh, that's right. You need your battle buddy, somebody to ride with you to avoid the carjackings. When you're coming to a stop, leave enough room to maneuver around other cars, especially if you sense trouble and need to get away. This is the nation's capital of the United States of America. This is the advice that D.C. police have to give you. Always drive with the doors locked. If a thief can't get into your vehicle, you stand a better chance of leaving with it. Don't stop to assist a stranger whose car has broken down. Holy cow. So now the cops are saying, don't do that. Don't help people who have broken down vehicles. They'll be eaten by the wolves. No. Listen to this. Don't stop to assist a stranger whose car is broken down. You can help instead by driving to the nearest phone or using your cell phone to call police for help. That's third world. Everything I just read to you is like advice. It's like the kind of advice the State Department would give you before you go into a third world country. Read up on the risks that you may be encountering as you go there. No, this is the United States of America. This is the nation's capital. And this is insane. Tomorrow on the program, we'll have a student from GW University joining us. She's Jewish. She'll talk about what's happening on her campus, all those terrorist sympathizers. How's she holding up? And Congressman Andy Biggs will be with us tomorrow as well. We'll talk about all these funding bills and the Biden crime family. Sure to be news on that. The great one, Mark Levin, up next.